I'm sure everyone's going to give you the hero's welcome you deserve. Big, giant round of applause, please. It's David Dance.
Oh, is this? I thought you had the mic, but this is also the mic.
You can use that one.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, boss. Hey, everyone. Yeah, my name's Dave. I am a developer advocate at Zeroheight. Zeroheight, if you don't know about it, is a design system management tool, similar in the vein to Storybook, but just that next step along for like documenting stuff more elaborately and design. Don't want to be competitive, you know, there's other tools, but so yeah, those are my details. That's my website, darn.es. There's zeroheight.com as well. I use Mastodon most of the time for similar reasons to yourself, Emma, on Twitter. Sorry, X. But before I was at Zeroheight, I worked at Nord Health. I joined Zeroheight about a month ago now. But at Nord Health, we built various products for the healthcare industry. So that was for actually like pets and as well as people across the yeah. That's healthcare. Pets are got to be healthy, right? Yeah. So we built a lot of healthcare products, and we owned those, and we needed to create tooling to manage all of those applications and build components. Ergo, a design system. So I worked on the Nord design system team, and we built Nord design system. And Nord design system is comprised of tokens, CSS framework, fonts, themes, components, icons, documentation, everything. Like it's got all sorts in there, and it has a lot of components. Like 40 doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot to manage with all their variations and stuff like that. I'm sure you can imagine like the variations just go beyond it when you have like different attributes and props and options for those components. But I don't want to go through every single component in the next 13 minutes. But what I'm going to focus in on is tabs. You know tabs? Tabs, you click on the button, shows a bit of content, hides the other bit of content. So I'm going to focus in on just one set of components that I worked on at Nord Health. This tabs UI. So first of all, oh wait, is it gonna? Oh, have I skipped along too far? Sorry. Whoa, steady, easy. Okay, so this is starting point. So what I do is research and experimentation. So I'll research into what the existing landscape is, what tabs are in general, what tabs are on the internet, how UI is developed for it, and then go into semantics, how it should be structured, and then accessibility, and then design and presentation, and then just some extra bits that I'm going to put at the end on interesting stuff that I enjoyed as part of the development process. So I'm just going to be throwing out links through this, but if you want to take pictures of this, I can obviously share my slides at the end of this. But these were like various articles and resources that I looked into on like tabs UI and tab semantics and tab stuff on the internet. So W3C, inclusive components, MDN. There's more stuff like CSS tricks. Dave Rupert with a few articles on like spicy sections and proof of concepts on like UI for that, on hiding and showing content in a kind of tabular fashion. Zach Leatherman, great stuff. Open UI, lots of good stuff. So yeah, take a picture of that if you want, or I will definitely share the slides afterwards. So some takeaways from that. So we've got in the HTML spec for like attributes and things like that, there is tab and tab list roles. Sorry, just to preface this is just a couple of things that I've learned from that. There's loads of other stuff that I could go into, but I've only got like a limited amount of time. So this is just some of the stuff. So like tabs and tab list for the role attribute on HTML elements. There's tab list using ARIA label to like semantically label the grouping of tabs, those buttons. The the use of ARIA controls and labeled by to like label extra elements on there within that piece of UI. And then tab index to make sure the focusing is going in the right order of things and making sure the person's getting guided around in an expected fashion. So after all of that, I'm going to build that. So this is what it looks like. Looks pretty good, right? Pretty clean, pretty simplistic, very usable as a design system. I'm not being critical of HTML, I love it. But for developers who need to implement this stuff consistently throughout multiple projects and multiple applications, they need something that's a little bit more simplified or a little bit more pseudocode, if you will. So what if it was something a bit more like this? So say they just had to put in these elements and it would behave in the exact same way, but they would just drop these HTML elements into the page and the tabs UI would just work, TM. So at Nord Health, we used web components to build our components, and we did that through Lit. So Lit is a library for building web components, and we built on top of that. So we built in the same way web components are done as part of like the JavaScript like API or like APIs in the browser. But Lit is like a base component that you riff off on top of that. So you can start with a Lit component and then build on top of that for whatever you need. And we found that to be very powerful for our use. I'll show you like a quick like demo, which is, or a quick example that's actually from the Lit docs themselves. So this is like typical like JavaScript example, but I've also put a TypeScript example if you want it. Like, I won't get into the politics of those two, but you have your own preferences. But yeah, we found Lit to be really powerful for it. I mean, I am a big fan of web components in general as vanilla ones, but I'm also a big fan of them in the use of like Lit because you still get to learn the API and how it works, and you don't drift away from what the expected spec is, shall we say. So I'm going to quickly go through these different items, which is the controls and interaction. I've kind of skipped a few things, so I'm trying to squeeze everything into the time. But so these are the few touch points I went through in terms of accessibility. So I've kind of grouped them all together. So accessibility isn't just like tabbing and focus rings and things like that. Like making something accessible is like clicking on stuff as well. So I'm going to go through mouse and touch control, keyboard control, and then pragmatic control, or programmatic control, sorry. And that's so developers can actually control how that tab UI behaves. And when you click on stuff, when you change the structure of that element or you add attributes, it responds in the same way. So the developer can actually control how that tab UI behaves as well as the person like clicking on that piece of UI. So here it is, tabs. I've skipped a load of code. So this is the tabs UI that's inside of the Nord design system, and it comprises of a tab item or a tab button itself, and then a tab group to group all of those buttons together, and then a tab panel, which contains all the chunk of content that's below. So I've kind of grouped them as like a set of components. I kind of seen them quite similar to summary details in HTML, where they pair together and kind of work quite powerfully. So this is kind of built in the similar fashion. And what I wanted to show you is just a bit of the example code, a bit of code inside of that component code. Because what's interesting is inside of web components, you can kind of write like vanilla JavaScript. I don't expect you to read all through that entire code there, but like you can see things like query selector all and like set attribute and all that kind of stuff, or reading attributes. It's very similar to normal like JavaScript. And you can do that inside of web components and not just inside of Lit web components, vanilla web components as well. So you can just write kind of traditional vanilla JavaScript, shall we say. It's quite a comfortable experience. So we've got a mouse control. We've been adjusting things with attributes and using query selector to select the buttons and things like that. So the next thing is keyboard control. to make it more accessible. So we want to be able to go left and right and use keyboard controls to navigate through it and show focusing as well, just to make it a bit clearer that they're interacting with this element and it's changing. So again, the JavaScript inside of this is quite simple. I'm using a case switch statement just to switch through using the keyboard controls, trying to make it as readable as possible, very simplified, to allow people to tab through it. And then the final thing on that list was the programmatic control. So that would be controlling things using the actual code itself. So like changing the attribute or using methods and things like that. But in this case, it's just an attribute. And then that's another powerful thing about web components is that you can use attributes to you can just invent attributes, basically. You can just add them to the element and then listen for them and respond to them and change how they behave and read their values as well. In this case, I've just put an attribute without a value. So this is the tab that's actually been selected. So when the page loads, that tab will be the default tab that's selected out of that set of components. And the way I'm doing that is actually through a mutation observer, just so I can kind of listen for changes like live. So not only is the page going to load with that selected, but the developer can also force the tab to be selected as the application is running. So we use Mutation Observer to go through that. I really recommend this article from Louis. It's really detailed. It's very long, but it's really good because Mutation Observer, it seems very powerful, but it's quite complex when you have to kind of constantly like listen for stuff. But I found it to be really useful. So we're good for time, pretty good. So I'm going to move on to my favorite bit because I like CSS. As much as I have to write a lot of JavaScript, and I guess a lot of front-end people here end up writing a lot of JavaScript, I like the CSS bit. I like it a lot. So there's a couple of like little details that I'm quite pleased about in this. I don't know if you've noticed, but when you select the tab item, it goes bold, but the layout doesn't shift. Normally, when you make something bold, the layout shifts. So there was a little trick that one of my colleagues showed me, and what you can do is use a pseudo element to fill in the value. So you put in an attribute onto that element, fill it in the content of that pseudo element, and then I think I have it fixed or like absolute positioned on selection, is that it won't adjust the size. It will just make that bold and reveal it. And it also means that the text doesn't get hidden away. That's still selectable text. It's just showing a bold version of it without causing a reflow or restructure. Because without, it's quite kind of, you can notice a little bit of jarring or a little bit of layout shift, which is a bit like not pretty. So another thing I was quite proud of, and I posted this back when Twitter was called Twitter, and people seem to like it quite a lot, was this kind of like scrolling shadow effect, where if the screen's too small, well, not even the screen's too small, if the space within is too small and the tabs are too long in that space, it will create this little like subtle shadow, and they'll go off into the fold, into the like off the edge, and then you can scroll and it will get rid of that shadow. And that was done using, admittedly, a trick from Leo Veru. Totally stole it, I'll be honest, but I'm getting the link, and I'm being honest that I didn't steal it, I used it. But it's a really great trick. It's rather complex for its use case. I'm looking forward to scroll timeline being a bit more of a kind of standard thing in CSS, because this is what this would solve, to be able to change CSS depending on the scroll position and the scroll timeline and all that kind of stuff. And I have 50 seconds left, so I can plug my own website and the article that has the rest of the details on it about how I built these set of components. And I also have been writing a lot more about web components in general, just like vanilla ones, creating very like simplified components that don't require lit. I quite like the idea of standalone web components, and I'm planning to do a talk about that in a little bit more detail. But with that, thank you for listening, and have a good rest of your day.